call the regular meeting of the Education Neighborhoods order. We expect that Mr. Zine may be here. I don't know about Ms. Perry at this time, but why don't we start with item 1 for our commissioner?
Item number 1 is the communication from the mayor relative to the reappointment Mr. Daniel Gateka to the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners for the term ending June 30th, 2017.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Give me your correct pronunciation of your last name.
Gatika.
Gatika.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for being here, and thank you for agreeing to re-up on this board.
Absolutely.
We wanted to just go through a couple of things just to get your insights. As you know, we're going through transitions and things on the board, going through elections at this time, and today we're going to be discussing an issue which is foremost on most neighborhood councils' mind, is the finances and how we can regulate them and keep track of them. And so let me just start off by asking you, you've been on the board for a while. What is your primary goal of getting reappointed? Is there items that are going undone? What is your goal?
Absolutely. We, we've also had a few new commissioners come on board, and we've had a few commissioners come on board, and we've started a standardized list that we want like NCs to be able to follow, so that when they're being evaluated, they actually know what they're being evaluated by. We also just started on something that trying to get a working group together to work on being more clear on how to use the monies that the city provides the NC, so that there's no discrepancies and there's no misuses of funds. So there's a couple of projects that I've been working on with colleagues that I definitely want to see carried out.
Okay. And then how many members are on your board currently?
7.
7
One for
members.
each service planning area.
Okay. And then has the board set up a number of priorities or what they're looking for over the next several months or year?
Yeah, actually, we just got a new president, and we are scheduled to have a retreat in next month, if I'm not mistaken, and that's usually when we set our priorities for the year. We had set priorities about a year ago for this past year, so we'll be setting new ones soon.
Okay. And you're also going through a transition with a new general manager or an interim general manager?
Yes.
What are some of the things that you and the board are looking at to basically establish with the new direction or with a new general manager?
You know what? Being that the interim general manager has been with the department for a while, has worked with us, I think it's gonna be a seamless transition. She'll probably take off where BH left off, and that's just working with us, working together. I know in the past there was miscommunication between the board and the general manager, but in the last couple months, almost to a year, I think we've worked together better and on the same priorities.
Okay. And then, do you have any idea, give us some idea, because we have, just listening to some of the members that come, neighborhood council members that come to committee, give us an idea of some of the things that you believe that the commission and the general manager could be more effective at.
The commission and general manager be more effective at, I think, just providing guidance for the NCs. See, the NCs are interesting in that there's quite a few that are very high functioning, and there's quite a few that I think that aren't low functioning but are lesser functioning than the higher ones. And I think that those are the ones that need a little bit more help, a little bit more guidance, and in some cases a little bit more structure in how things should happen. And and in my personal opinion, some ramifications when things don't happen the way they should. So I think in conjunction with the general manager, we can help train these NCs on how to conduct, from something as easy as conducting a meeting to how to put together an accurate, realistic budget so that their monies are accounted for correctly. I think those are probably two of the main things that NCs need the most, especially from being on the board for 6 years, from what I've seen. It's usually, the issues usually surround that. They surround the money, or they surround just the managing of a meeting.
Okay. Now, were you on the neighborhood council before you became a commissioner?
Actually, I was not. I 6 years ago, I was in the Northeast Valley. I was on 3 other community boards. Pacoima Neighborhood Council was just about to start They had their working group to put it together. I was working with other community groups, so I never really came on board. Then after a while, I just realized that I prefer my perspective as the taxpayer on the board, because we always, we keep a board balanced. So we have a few folks who are NCs, and then we have, I think, 2 folks who aren't part of the NC program.
Let me just give you a couple of things. Just been on this committee for a short while, and the things that kind of amazed me is that a couple of them is that we have people that have come and expressed, as you mentioned, part of the board is to give guidance. The people have actually expressed they need no guidance, want no guidance, and will not answer your mail nor your surveys. I mean,
Right.
And so you have that extreme. Then you have those who want the commission or the city to fill every void, such as a grievance process, and come to the meetings and help them conduct the meetings. And the one startling thing I've seen is that we had a number of meetings in which actually boards came in and said the only people that attend the meetings are the board members, which was amazing to me because I thought the whole issue was outreach, listening to the public, not just those that were elected. And I'm just wondering, is that a sense that you have from your commission, or how have you begin to look at what do you do with the boards that say, leave us alone, just send us our money, don't cut our budget, and we'll see you next year?
Right. No, it's, that's what I've been saying for the last, 5-6 years, is you have the higher functioning ones who say, we don't need any restrictions, we're okay, we're running our meetings perfectly fine, we're spending our money the way we're supposed to, leave us alone. They got the ones who are in dire, they need help. They can't hold a quorum, they're having internal issues with their board members. I think that's just the nature of the beast when you have, 90 plus NCs run by, over 1,600 different folks. And I think that as a commission and as in the department, we have to help the ones that need the help. We've made a conscious decision about 2 years ago as a board that any policy that we pass, that we would vet it amongst the NCs through working groups, so that we're not just putting down we're setting forward a policy that's going to only help X amount of neighborhood councils and affect negatively the ones that are working well. So I think that's one way we've been able to kind of be more productive, is figuring out a way that when we pass a policy that addresses some issue, it's going to help both, not just the ones that are high functioning, but the ones that that need a lot of help. Because that's usually what we get. Before, when we would pass something, the higher functioning ones say, well, we don't have that problem. Why, why is now you telling us what we need to do with our money, or why are you telling us now we need to, post in 5 different places when we were doing okay? We had people at our meeting. So I think that I wish there was a simple solution to that, but there isn't. It's just that we have 90 plus NCs that we got to somehow, take into consideration whenever we're setting policy for the department.
And then the other issue is that one of the items we're going to have on the agenda today is talk about the finances, but also the longer issue of trying to come up with guidance as to what makes a neighborhood council eligible to continue receiving money. Are there certain things they should accomplish? Is there certain ways they should manage their budget? And even on one of the notes we have today is that even after a lot of discussion, it appears that from the first round of elections, there was an interest in getting input from those who voted. Mm-hmm. And, it couldn't be a lot of time. There's only, I think, 4 questions, but only 30-some% of the people even chose to answer the questions. And so it appears, at least from my perspective, that there's a view of such independence that we don't want to communicate. And yet we want you to put on our elections and all that other stuff. So those are things that I'm trying to grapple with and figure out what would be a reasonable system.
It's been a struggle. It really has. For that same, and this is what I'm saying, that I like my perspective. The fact that I haven't been on the NC board is that I'm the taxpayer whose money is being used, for the NCs. And what are you guys showing us? What are you guys doing to improve civic participation? to help carry the services to your community. That's some of the questions that I always ask, or my colleagues would ask when we have NCs come in front of us. And it's a tough issue because, again, somewhere along the line, from my personal opinion, it seems like the concept kind of got lost in terms of what the whole purpose of an NC was, which is, again, to create civic participation. But then when you talk to them about their outreach, it's well, we send a flyer and, we held this and that. And some of those things might help, but the reality is most folks know that, who've worked in that area, to effective outreach is really sometimes putting on some tennis shoes and knocking on a door and meeting people and going to your neighbor. And to me, that's always been kind of like my idea of an NC is the neighborhood part. And, in NCs, some have been decent at it. Some are, that's just not their priority. Their priority is what can we do, with our money that we have.
And my final question is that has your commission looked at any kind of criteria of what allows a neighborhood council to stay eligible? Have they looked at anything in which you're looking at to where they can be given criteria to achieve during a year or things of that nature?
We've had different ideas come up, but as I mentioned earlier, right now we're going to start a working group with some NC folks and some budget folks, and try to set those parameters, try to set those guidelines for how money should be used, kind of clarify, how the money, how the money should be used. I think that's a big issue that some NCs have said, that they thought they could use the money for this or that, and at the end they find out they couldn't. And in the same process, have an effective budget that shows exactly how the money is going to be used. And if the money isn't used, it's really up to the NCs, because we as a board, and I think you've heard this before, we really have no teeth. All we can do is set policy, right? We can come up with recommendations, but at the end of the day, we can't say, well, if this NC doesn't follow these rules, your money's going to be taken away.
But because you're advisory. Is any discussion by the commission of changing the charter in that regard?
It's come up, but it's one of those ideas that I don't know as a full commission we've ever kind of all agreed on. I think some folks have felt that, I know in the past it was when it was brought up, it was looked at as the board trying to get a power pool, and it was really frowned upon by a lot of NCs. So it's never, so we kind of never, we've changing the charter hasn't really been something that has been seriously considered. It's been mentioned, but it's never been seriously considered.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the challenge, you got there in 06, so you've been there since 06, so you've seen the challenge.
I've seen a lot.
Frustration.
Yes.
The concern I have is we have neighborhood councils, and then we have homeowner groups, Sherman Oaks homeowners and Woodland Hills homeowners, et cetera. It seems that the homeowner groups that are separate, independent, don't receive funding, work very, very well. They have good attendance. The neighborhood councils, at least what I've seen many times, is where's our money? We want the money. But as far as effectiveness, and as far as, unless it's a controversial meeting,
Right.
other than the board members and a couple other folks, it's a very small turnout.
Right.
Is that what you've seen in your experience?
Yeah, I've seen it, and I've heard it. I've seen it at some of our meetings. They're similar in that when there's a hot button issue on the agenda, we get a lot of people that come out, and then when there isn't, we all have 2 or 3 people. So, it's no different with the NCs.
That's at the commission level.
As a commissioner, and with the NCs. So, just to give you an idea, at every monthly meeting, wherever area we're in, we invite the local NCs to come in and kind of just talk to us about their best practices. And they'll start telling us what's working for them, what's not working for them. And one of the questions that always comes up is, how are your meetings attended? And they say that. So they say, when we have a hot issue up, then we have a lot of folks come in. And then, when there isn't, then we have a lot less.
Yeah.
That number, it's different. There's still some NCs that, for whatever reason, have a few people, 20, 15 people that come to our meetings on a regular basis. And there's some that they say that we have 2 or 3. So,
Well, the concern I've had is with the audits, the lack of audits, the equipment comes in when they have new members on the board. They buy equipment and then it disappears. No one
Right.
keeps accounting of it, which was an issue I brought up with the former general manager
Right.
a number of times. But 90-plus neighborhood councils in the city, and I know it's more than the initial stage. I mean, we've been into this now for a long time.
Right.
And I don't know, the money we're investing, if we're getting a return versus those dollars that are going in, which accounts to millions of dollars if you start adding it up, the 90-plus, plus to run Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, the return that we're getting for the taxpayers of Los Angeles. I mean, I've kind of been disappointed in that people haven't gotten involved. And people have other issues. They got families, they got school, they got jobs, they have all kinds of other issues. So it's here. We'd like to make it work. We'd like to make it work better. And my respect to you as a member commissioner, especially spending that much time and then going on another experience with it. But for me, it's been very frustrating and costly. If you look at the investment in time and money,
Right.
energy versus what we've received in return to benefit the communities. I see, some hire executive directors, some hire this, some hire that.
Right.
I never envisioned that the neighbor councils would have money for that type of thing. It would be something for a community enhancement, do this, do that,
Right.
something tangible.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess I feel your same frustration.
Yeah.
So
And-
we
and
don't
it's-
give up, we continue to try
No,
to make it
no,
better.
thank you. And like I said, I think this working group that we're going to be putting together is going to actually address some of those issues of where money should be spent. Like, we're going to sit down with the NCs and ask them, look, does it make sense to use 40% of your budget on administrative cost? Does it make, and so we're going to hopefully, when we're done with this, have a clear path for the NCs and say, we want you to adopt this. This is how we want you to basically spend your money. This is what makes most sense and how to utilize your money. So that's something we definitely want to, we want to achieve soon.
Very good.
Thank you.
Well, let me say thank you very much. When is this scheduled for council?
I've spoken with Richard Williams, City Clerk. I've spoken with the Commissioner, and we will be scheduling this for Tuesday, August the 28th.
August 28th, and all paperwork's in and such?
At this time,
Right here.
Okay.
No.
we do not officially have a report from the City Ethics Commission regarding the statement of economic interest for the Commissioner, but we anticipate that will be
It'll be-
coming soon.
I have it with me, actually, so I'll be turning it in as soon as I'm done here.
I'm Darrell Powell with the CLA's office. I've talked to the Ethics Commission, and he's in the process of completing the paperwork and turning it in,
Okay, very
and
good.
they're aware.
But we'll have it by the 28th.
Yes.
Yes, correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Item 2, is that we should be able to do on consent, receive and file. We dealt with that at the last meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions on that?
So as a matter of record, you want me to read it off?
Okay.
Okay. Item number 2 is continued from July 24th, 2012, a report from the CLA and CAO relative to determination of appropriate dollar amount for each neighborhood council contribute toward conducting the 2012 neighborhood council elections.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll receive and file that report.
Yes.
Okay. Is it?
Yeah, oh, that's more, verbal reports.
Oh, you do?
Okay. Item number 3.
3.
Item number 3 is a verbal status report from the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, interim general manager relative to the 2012 neighborhood council elections.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. Grace Sulu, Interim General Manager for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. I'm going to provide some information about the current election process, as well as some of the elections that we've already held. In Region 1 on August 4th, we did hold elections for 7 neighborhood councils. The region had 8 neighborhood councils. One of the neighborhood councils had uncontested elections, so they went straight to a board affirmation so that we could save costs on the election process for them. The other remaining 7, in each of the 7, out of the 5 of them, out of the 7, actually had more voter turnout than they did in 2010. The 2 that did not, one of them had significantly fewer seats up for election, and then in the other neighborhood council, they in 2010 they did have a a big issue before the board, so there was more voter turnout for that one that they did not have in 2012. So in terms of the candidates per seat, we had a 42% increase from 2010. And in terms of voters, we had a 29.84% increase. So currently we are looking at the next region, which will be September 8th, and they had 64 seats in Region 2 that were open, and we now have 135 candidates for those seats. So every neighborhood council that's holding an election in that region, which will be 6 of them, they will be having contested elections. There's 2 neighborhood councils in that region that are having selection process, and then one of them is not up until 2014, so they won't be having an election or selection this year. I don't know if the council members have any specific questions in terms of some of these results.
Yeah. Maybe give us some ideas, since you've been there how long now as an interim?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And 1 day.
All right. But you've been a part of the department for how long?
I've been part of the department in the field division for about 4.5 years.
1.5 years. 'Cause, you know, one of the things, and you've sat through some of these committee meetings, and we're just trying to get a perspective of the future and what do you see as it relates to things that we should concentrate on, or things that we can maybe address some of these ongoing ills that keep coming up, whether it's dealing with funding or dealing with grievances or attendance, or because there just seems to be so many things that just kind of linger and maybe not go away.
That's correct. There are several themes, I think, that I've seen in the last few years that I've been in the department. Funding would be the number one issue in regards to the neighborhood council funding and how that is administered. Just in the last 2 weeks, from trying to get a grasp of what goes on in that part of the department, it's been somewhat confusing in terms of how the department actually tracks the funds and how they're expended. And for us, the system itself, we have very dedicated staff who have been making a system that is not really functional work, just out of sheer people power. And so, you know, I've had a lot of admiration for the staff that they've been able to even pull it off for this amount of time. But to be quite honest, there need to be some, I think, significant overhaul of the funding program in terms of how we process demand warrants, auto deducts, purchase cards, and to increase the transparency in terms of what is being spent. So that is my focus right now, is to do that. And obviously the successful administration of the elections, which will run through November 15th. But another thing that has been ongoing, as you mentioned, grievances. There was last fall, I did work pretty closely with neighborhood councils and Councilmember Krikorian's office to look at an overhaul of the grievance process, because there are actually 2 systems under the plan for a citywide system of neighborhood councils. There is one for complaints that come to the department, and then there's one for grievances that actually go to the neighborhood councils. And most people don't know that there's actually 2 separate systems, and there's not really anything in terms of system-wise on the complaint side that really, it just basically gets channeled back to the neighborhood council as a grievance. So we did develop a full policy for recommendation, but I believe that's still before the Education Neighborhood Committee at this point.
And then the other thing is that, so that's where you're putting your concentration on. What is your sense in the lack of participation by members? We hear stories all the way from board members run members away. There's not an interest. There's not a cohesive effort to get people into meetings. And so I was surprised when we first sat down with board members that found out in many instances they're the only ones that attend the meetings. So there's not this community level of participation that people assumed.
I think that that is not something that is throughout the city. I think that there are neighborhood councils that are struggling in certain areas. But there are also neighbor councils that are quite successful in having stakeholders, significant amount of stakeholders go to their meetings, and not only that, but actually work in their committees. I think that's, I think it's, it's a matter of expectation. Councilmember Zine, I know you were expressing your disappointment in the number of stakeholders participating. However, I kind of see it as, we currently have approximately 17 to 1,800 stakeholders in the system, and that's just as board members, and that's not including all the committee members. And these are people that would not have likely been involved within the city government. And throughout the years, we've have thousands and thousands that have been involved in a way that there was not a system for them to be involved with city government before the neighbor council system. So I think that yes, while there is room for improvement in some areas with stakeholder participation, there are a lot of good things that are coming out of neighbor councils that I think are worthy to mention and to acknowledge.
What is your perspective as it relates to whether there's neighbor councils that are willing to accept guidance?
With neighbor councils, I think that guidance, the word guidance, I think everybody is open to. Having rules and regulations just put upon them without their input is something that I don't think anybody would be open to. However, in my experience, that when we have, opened the door for collaboration with them, that they have been very open to this and have provided some really great ideas on how the system can be adapted so that it's a win-win situation for both the city and the neighborhood councils.
What I'm concerned with, and I think the one that keeps coming up is the finances. Is that an area that requires collaboration, or is that something that Dunn should set up some policies and say, this is how you're going to get paid, this is how you initiate a request, these are the types of things money should be spent? Is that something that you have to collaborate with all 95?
I think in regards to funding, that there are certain rules that are set by the city that need to be followed for funding, because this is public funds that they are spending. On the other hand, too, I think that there is room for improvements on the existing system. Part of our mission is to make government more responsive to local needs, and I think neighborhood councils are a unique entity in which that they're not completely city entities in a way that we're used to. And so I think that sometimes we have to look at the existing rules in the city and say, well, does it really make sense to apply this just cookie cutter on the neighborhood councils, that perhaps that there is a way that would satisfy safeguards for the funding program that would also allow for some flexibility on the neighborhood council board members, where they are volunteers in the end, and while yes there are rules to follow, some of them might be some that might have some ability to have some flexibility.
What is your perception of the future role of the commission? Is that, because it's advisory, is that something that helps the general manager? Is that something that the neighbor councils pay attention to, or just what do you see their role down the road?
I think the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners could definitely have a great influence in terms of setting policies that would systemically help the neighbor council system and the department. I think in the past there have been times when they've kind of been out of step with neighborhood councils and the department, but I feel that in the last year or so we've been really trying to work collaboratively with all together, and out of that has come some good policy, such as the bylaws table of content policy, which sets a standardization for bylaws, and I think that's with a continued openness towards collaboration with both the department and the neighborhood councils, that there's definitely a role for them.
But if they can set policy but not impose it, then where do they fit in this equation?
Well, I would need to speak with city attorney about that, because there are certain situations where, they set the rule on it, and that's the way it's supposed to be. For instance, we have posting policies, and again, the table of contents policy that neighborhood councils basically, you need to follow. So I think it's just a matter of the type of policy that they have to set, and getting city attorney advice as to, what's the best way, because perhaps, something that they set policy-wise may be something the city council has to take up and do through ordinance, which the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners is actually looking at the plan to update it, because it is quite out of date. And ultimately, they can make the recommendation for city council to make the final changes.
But my last question, but I think this is the crux of what I've heard, is that neither the commission nor the department can impose on the neighborhood council. So you might offer them suggestions, you might come up with policies, but if they choose not to follow them, then you end up with just a policy or a rule that doesn't get complied with.
Well, that's not exactly the case, because the departments under the plan, can put neighborhood councils under exhaustive efforts. And once they're in
Under what?
exhaustive efforts,
Mm-hmm.
and once they're in exhaustive efforts, they go down this path that the final resolution of that can be decertification by the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. So there is a path for neighborhood councils that are violating funding rules or other laws that affect them. So I definitely think that there is a mechanism.
Have we ever done that? Have we ever used that process?
Yes, the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners has decertified, I believe, 2 neighborhood councils in the past. We do have currently 1 neighborhood council in exhaustive efforts. The department's goal is obviously not to decertify neighborhood councils. Our goal is to make neighborhood councils work, and try to provide the support that they need to see that happen. So within exhaustive efforts, we're quite flexible in terms of how we get a neighborhood council back on its feet, whether it's through training, revising their bylaws, even facilitating their meetings until they get to the point where they can actually take over and continue on.
You mentioned that the percent increase on the elections, the 7 neighborhood councils where they had elections. What were the raw numbers? In comparison?
Would you like me to read them out to you? Or
How many showed up? Because we've got, you said 1,700, 1,800 out of, I'm looking at 4 million people in the city. On those elections, how many showed up?
So in Region 1, 1,016 people.
How many?
1,016 people came and voted in the elections.
How many in that population area?
I don't have the exact population in the whole of Region 1.
Region
Yeah.
1 is what area?
It is Foothill Trails, Sun Valley area.
Valley.
Yeah.
North-
So northeast Valley.
Valley?
Right.
And so that's, the Region 1 is the 7 neighborhood councils that had elections?
Right. So one of them went to board affirmation. So if you need
Out of
that,
that Northeast Valley, 1,100 showed up.
1,016 voters showed up to vote in those elections.
1,016 showed up.
Correct.
Out of the whole Northeast Valley,
Correct.
which means that that's a dismal turnout compared to the population. Is that the only one you have records for?
That's the only one currently.
And what kind of advertising did they do?
It depended on the neighborhood council. They collectively did a ad for the daily news. So they did one for a call for candidates approximately 60 days before the election, and then another for voters about 30 days out. Some neighborhood councils did lawn signs. They did individual mailers. Some did actually on the day of the election. They did a barbecue and invited folks so that they could get to know one another and be involved in that manner too.
Do you have how much they spent on the campaign to get folks out?
Every neighborhood council had a different amount, so I can get those numbers to you.
So I'm just trying to weigh how much we're spending, how much we're getting. 1,600 people is really a small number compared to 300,000 or 250,000 population for the Northeast Valley. Not criticizing you, you're in a very difficult
No, I
position.
know.
Being a former charter commissioner,
Right.
when we established neighborhood councils with Congress member Hahn, the designation was to empower, get them involved, get them motivated. And 10 years later, we're still struggling to try and get people committed. And I know they got personal issues and families and this and that and the other, but it's when we look at the investment of dollars, what we're putting in, what we're getting out, do we really actually balance to make it advantageous?
Correct, and I guess, elections might be, in that sense, not the best judge of that, only because, you're not including the hundreds upon thousands of hours that they're putting in throughout the year, that they are getting stakeholder involvement in their communities on land use issues, public safety issues, and so I think just judging that the number by the elections is probably not as accurate. I think we should come back with more numbers in regards to perception of, the numbers of hours that they're putting in and what they've accomplished in terms of within their communities. I think that would be a more accurate judge.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll accept this item, and then we'll go to item 4.
Item number 4 is a verbal report from the Chief Legislative Analyst, City Administrative Officer, and Dunn, relative to revamping all aspects of the current fiscal system for tracking, documenting, and reconciling neighborhood council expenditures, including encumbrances and invoice payments, and the proposed implementation of the standardized requirements with which each neighborhood council must comply in order to receive its annual budget appropriation.
Good afternoon. And I thought we could do and maybe start the initial steps, because there's so much conversation about the finances and how things are paid. One of the things I'd like to do is that in the initial stages is ask the CAO along with Dunn to kind of go through and track the high points of what the decisions that are made and how funding is distributed, how it's used, and really identify where the areas that are confusion are the bigger error factors, so that we can see how and what we need to do to correct that, and if there are new policies that need to be in place that dictate on how people either allocate funds or hold on to funds, or whatever the terminology is accurate, that we need to have from my perspective, if there's a standardization of anything, it has to be on the funding for how we use the city's money, and that hopefully a system that doesn't require at every step the multiple kickbacks or the fact that they are held in abeyance or we can't get to them, and then a clear definitive direction as to the responsibility of neighborhood council to produce accurate and clear reports and who reviews them, because if they don't get reviewed by Dunn and they sit in a box for a while and then eventually they get done, and next thing you know we have the controller saying I can't approve them, and we just basically appear that we're using up a lot of our time and energy on the same document. So what I want to see if we can just have a conversation about how we can address this to create where there is no guidance, we can create where there's guidance that we want to adopt that's already in place, we can include. But it's really, I think that's going to be a major issue of how we can get to the point that there's a streamlined system of accountability for the finances. So we'd like to start off.
Just as an overview, this is all of the money that Paul Smith CLA, the empowerment fund starts as a budgetary matter on an annual basis. The CAO will prepare the budget for the department, as well as making an assessment of how much money can be given to the individual NCs for their empowerment fund expenditures. After the budget is adopted, the appropriations are divvied up amongst the NCs, then the NCs have a responsibility of developing a budget. And there are templates for this that the department has developed. And there's codes for the types of expenditures that list out what they're going to be. It can be as detailed as they want or as general as they want. But that is the framework of their expenditure program is set forth in their budgets. Now, as they go throughout their planning year or their year,
Let me start one thing. When you mentioned the budget, when it gets started, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, it's difficult for a CAO to budget if you don't know what's left and where it's placed and things of that nature. So it seems like there's got to be some consistent system to where everybody can read the reports and they go into an electronic system where you say neighborhood council A has $22 left and so-and-so's got $3,000. So where if you're going to budget for the subsequent year, those are fundamental things you're going to need.
I'll let the CEO talk about, but historically, it's been a very difficult process to determine where. Remember, we had that rollover for several years, where unexpended funds would just roll over, and then we stopped that, and we have what it calls an encumbrance process now, which is, in my mind, just another way of saying a rollover. But I think the difficulty I am seeing is those. How do we account for those funds at the end of the year, and how much of that general fund are we going to put into the system? And the difficulties the CAO has of trying to determine what's left over at the end of the year if the NCs and the department are going to encumber funds right and left right up to the time of the date that the controller sets, where no longer you can do that. In my mind, it's a very difficult process to come out with a number that's going to not only provide the department some operating expense, but also for the NCs for their empowerment program.
Good afternoon, Councilmember. Delilah Pucci with the CAO. Just to take it a step back for a sec, a few years ago, the way we would prepare the budget was basically every year neighborhood councils would get a certain appropriation. At the time, it was $50,000, reduced to $45,000 or $40,000. Because of the rollover policy, the department never had to thoroughly track NC funding, because at the end of the year, if it was a $50,000 appropriation, any NC with an amount over $100,000, above 100, just got swept, since they had $50,000 coming on July 1st. As of last year, when we discontinued the rollover policy, it brought more of a responsibility on the department to track their funding, because now you can no longer follow that policy of sweeping a neighborhood council, since we introduced an encumbrance policy. Unfortunately, the department doesn't have the tools or the reporting requirements to track encumbrances the way that the city views as they should be tracked. They don't have the tools to provide reports on the funding program the way they should have been reported. So when the CEO prepares the budget, we have no idea how much funding is available in the empowerment fund, because the department has a backlog of demand warrants that do not reflect an up-to-date balance for each NC. The CAO and the CLE met with the department last week to go over the entire process, whether it's a demand warrant, an auto deduct, or a P card. From my understanding, those are the three methods that NCs could pay for something for their appropriation. In that meeting, it became apparent to myself, and I believe to the CLE as well, that the department needs a revamped process. It's obsolete, it's out of date,